Hello everyone and welcome back to the big hall. I'm Sarah Davis, just Head of Higher Education and Student Experience, and I'll be chairing this closing keynote from day one. As we heard right back to the start of today, we're all here because of our learners, and it's one of the things that I enjoy so much about working in the education sector, that fundamentally, however many problems may come up, people are here because they want to do the best by their learners. And Shakira Martin's keynote this morning really highlighted the need for an education system that's adaptable, flexible, meets the needs of all learners. And we've known for a long time that technology, or the appropriate use of technology by people with the will to make that happen, holds great potential. For this closing keynote, we've got two speakers exploring different approaches to how you do that, how you put the learners, with all their many different various needs and life experiences, at the centre of their learning and broader student experience. So we'll hear from Rose Luckin, Professor of Learner-Centred Design at UCL Knowledge Lab, and then from Nick Woolley, who's Head of Library Services at Northumbria University. And following that, we'll have a panel discussion, and we'd really appreciate your questions to feed into that discussion. So when we come to that point, you can either put your hand up and speak into the microphone, but if you don't fancy that, or if you don't want to lose your question, do tweet them to the Digifest 18 hashtag during the presentations, and we'll have somebody feed them into the discussion later. So thank you, and for now I'd like to introduce you to Rose. Come up.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you for inviting me to Birmingham. How nice to be here. When I was appointed to UCL Knowledge Lab, I applied for a job that was Chair of Digital Technologies, but they decided they'd appoint two people. So they said, what would you like your job title to be? So I was allowed to choose to be Professor of Learner-Centred Design, which I was very pleased to have that title, because I do believe we have to put learners at the centre of what we do. So I'm going to talk to you today about putting the learner at the centre, and I'm hoping it's going to be a three-part harmony without discord, because I'm going to look very specifically at how artificial intelligence, it's everywhere, but how can it help us to achieve that learner-centeredness? But then I want to look at how we blend artificial and human intelligence, because I think that's where we get the best learner-centered approaches. And then I'll say a little bit about a project that I'm running down at UCL Knowledge Lab that I think can help to get the right kinds of AI technologies in the hands of the right people within universities, colleges, schools. So part one, how technology, specifically AI, can provide an adaptive learning experience for students. And I don't necessarily mean by that that we're expecting it to be a robot teacher of some sort that knows everything about the student and just delivers what they need. It might be that actually we make it possible for the students themselves to adapt what's going on to meet their needs, because they understand themselves much better. So when I say artificial intelligence, generally, if I say, oh, what do we mean by artificial intelligence? People tend to think of a piece of software, such as She, and generally we get things from movies. So we get robots, we get bits of software, or we get things like Siri and Alexa, and they are, of course, all manifestations of artificial intelligence. But actually, artificial intelligence isn't really about the technology. The technology is just the way that we manifest artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is really about intelligence. And most definitions of artificial intelligence have some phrasing that compares the intelligence that we achieve through things like machine learning with human intelligence. So this is a recent definition from the Oxford Reference Library, and we talk about requiring intelligence when done by humans. So we've still got that comparison. We've moved away from saying technology that achieves behaviors that we would consider to be intelligent in humans, but we're still talking about requiring intelligence when done by humans. But actually, when it comes to the crunch, we're not very good at deciding what intelligence is when it comes to humans. You know, we're still quite mixed about what we think it is. I mean, Einstein is reported to have said, the true sign of intelligence is not knowledge but imagination. Socrates is reported to have said, I know that I'm intelligent because I know that I know nothing. And actually, that's a really important one, because knowing what we know and what we don't know is an extremely difficult task, and actually something that AI is not very good at. Somebody who can handle criticism without denial, blame, excuses, or anxiety, so emotional intelligence. Again, something that a machine can mimic, but a machine can't actually have emotional intelligence. IQ test over 100? That's what Mensah would say, grandmaster at the game of Go. Obviously referring to the Lee Sedol versus AlphaGo battle, where we did have an artificial intelligence system developed by Google DeepMind that did beat Go master Lee Sedol. But actually, we can do this comparison of AI and human intelligence, but when it comes to education, it's fundamentally important to remember that actually, at heart, artificial intelligence isn't the technologies, it isn't the software, it isn't the hardware, it's about solving problems. And so what we actually need to do is to look at the problems that we face in education. And I think one of them really is about how do we be learner-centered when we've got lots of pressure, fewer teaching resources, got to achieve a lot, always having more demands on us as educators. And I've taught in schools, further education colleges, and higher education. And the demands never get less. They always get more. And every teacher I know wants to do the best for their students. But how do we achieve that? So we need to look at that space and say, well, what is the problem? And then we need to look at the multiple disciplines that make up artificial intelligence to see how it might help us. So it includes philosophy, thinking about what intelligence is, what learning is, what we might want people to know. Psychology, how people learn. Linguistics, how people communicate. And then, yes, of course, computer science, because we need to build the technologies, and artificial intelligence techniques, the techniques that help us to build the systems that will behave intelligently. But what is there out there now that can be used within education and is being used? Well, over the years, lots of work has been done on building systems that can teach, and I would call it tutoring rather than teaching, disciplines, particularly STEM disciplines, but also language learning, by adapting to the needs of the learner in a very fine-grained way. So on the screen, there are two images of commercial products. So we've got this one, which comes from Carnegie Learning. They have adaptive tutors that teach STEM subjects and some language learning. Very effective and designed on, interestingly, on the same model of how people learn that a lot of our school curriculum in the UK is based on as well, work by John Anderson. And then this one here is from a company called Alelo, and this comes from the States, and it's very much about trying to help people learn languages, but through simulation, and it does some cultural modeling, as the makers claim. So it's about helping people to understand body language as well as the words that are being spoken by people when you're trying to communicate with them. Now, tutors like this have been shown across multiple analyses to be as effective at teaching as a human teacher or tutor, lecturer, but not a human teaching an individual one-to-one. That's still the gold standard, but how many people can deliver that? How many people get to do that in their day job? How many learners get that much learner-centeredness? Not many. So these can be effective in well-defined areas of subject knowledge. So that's something we can do. Now, also, there are more and more of these sorts of systems that are intelligent knowledge bases or recommender systems that help to collate lots and lots of information. They organize that information in a way that means they can access that information very quickly in response to queries or in response to requests for resources, for example. So something like Woolley can go and find a resource from an enormous collection of millions and millions and millions to meet the needs of a teacher or a student. So it's not doing the tutoring, but it's going away and finding the resources. And something like IBM Watson, again, probably all know IBM Watson, but it is a machine learning system that has billions of pieces of information, and it can be accessed very easily. And now with voice interfaces, it can be accessed just via speech. So we don't have to have what I found as a tutor many, many years ago to be a barrier, the old keyboard barrier people can speak to the technology and they can get an answer. So this is AI that's here and now and can be used. Sorry, I didn't mean to flash that light at you. Pressed it by mistake, pressed the wrong button. Sorry about that. And actually, that's an interesting example because one of the wonderful things about AI is, of course, it's always consistent, doesn't make mistakes like humans do. But in many ways, humans are way, way, way more intelligent than AI. Okay, so I've said what AI can do to help us be learner-centered and deliver things, particularly in times when resources are tight. But what about thinking about how we blend human and artificial intelligence? Because actually, that's far more effective. Because if we think about ourselves and our students, we're about much, much more than just an academic body of knowledge. We want people to understand themselves. We want them to develop as human beings. We want them to develop in a world, to understand, to be able to interact socially, to be emotionally intelligent. There's many, many more things we need. And we need that knowledge that we're helping people to understand to be in a form that people can pick and apply effectively, potentially in collaboration with other people. So there's lots and lots of roles for human tutors. I don't want anybody to run away with the idea that I'm standing here saying that I think AI can replace a teacher. I do not, absolutely not. But I think AI can be hugely helpful to helping us to be better teachers and to helping our colleagues to be better teachers. So how can AI be blended with human intelligence to meet each learner's needs for their developing skills and knowledge? Because AI is very smart, but it doesn't understand itself. So even though Watson has billions and billions and billions of pieces of information that are carefully indexed and can be associated with a particular query, Watson has no ability to explain why it has picked a particular answer to a question. It doesn't know what it knows. It doesn't actually understand. And so if we were having a system that was deciding whether a student should follow this course or that course, should pass an exam or not pass an exam, it wouldn't be much good if that system couldn't explain the decisions that it had made. And this is one of the fundamental problems with artificial intelligence. So it can provide us as humans with information that we can then use and we can explain, but the AI can't explain itself. And in fact, because machine learning has become so immensely popular because of the huge commercially attractive successes in things like automatic driverless cars and the kinds of work that a lot of applications in the health services, the American Defense Association had a huge meeting about 18 months ago because they realized that they were going to need to have systems that could explain decisions. And of course, then they all sat there and realized the fundamental problem with machine learning is that it can't explain its decisions. So they are now investing billions of pounds to build systems that can explain decisions. It's called explainable AI. So there's a lot to play for as humans here. We're not going to be taken over the robots anytime soon. But what AI can do for us is to help us human teachers to understand people. That phrase up there I put is actually not correct. It's not that AI is good at understanding people. AI is good at collecting masses of data, analyzing it to help us understand people, understand ourselves, understand our students. Because we all know, as educators, that not all students are the same. Some people need help in one area, others need help in another. That's the whole point of learner-centeredness. So we can use AI to help us. So Century Tech is a UK company that's using machine learning in schools and further education colleges at the moment, moving into HE soon, I believe. And they use a combination of information from neuroscience about how people learn and machine learning techniques to personalize information and deliver content to students. But what they also do is help the teachers and tutors and lecturers to understand the way the students are progressing. So if you think of this as being a much more fine-grained feedback from the system about how your students are progressing than you would get from just a test, you can see if there are areas of what you're teaching where everybody's having a problem. You can see whether there are areas where particular people are having a problem. And actually, they're very careful to separate out the data that they collect to train their algorithms, to anonymize it, and to keep the personal data separate, because, of course, data protection is a big issue. at the moment, and will be increasingly so after the 25th of May. So we need to make sure that we're respecting people's data. And then there's what we could think about in the future. So this is a little story that I wrote with a colleague a year ago. And it is a story, it's not true, but it's technically all completely feasible. And in fact, elements of this already exist. So it's a story about Colin, who is a teaching assistant. And as you can see, we start with Colin. It's November. It's not actually. It's March. Let's say morning in a lecture hall, 10 years into the future. And as the winter sun streams through the windows, a lecturer named Jude adjusts the blind. At Jude's side, there is her AI teaching assistant, Colin. But Colin is not a robot. Colin is software. Colin has no embodiment. He is a software assistant, just like Siri or Alexa. And he can be accessed by voice, but also via an app on Jude's phone, tablet, via the tablets that the students use. And Colin works with Jude to help her collate all the information about her students. So as she's prepping for her lecture today, the students have had having a flipped learning class, so they've already had to do some assignments. And Colin has already collated all the information about what the students have done and is identifying where there are problems, where there aren't problems. And no longer is it the case that Jude herself needs to do assessments. When we think about student progress, we think about continual formative feedback, but not just feedback about whether each student is progressing in their understanding of waves as they move through the physics curriculum. We are looking at whether they are understanding themselves better. How is their metacognitive awareness going? Are they able to monitor themselves effectively? Are they resilient? That's another qualification we need much more of in the future. And are they able to work with other students? So we can look at a whole lot of information that gives us a much more holistic picture of our students. Because not only can we collate the information that we get from their interactions with the technology that we provide through school, college, or university, there's also masses of data from social networking, for example. There's data that we can ask students for, we can ask teachers for. And the power is really in the way that we analyze that data. So there's lots of discussion and claims about data being the new oil. Well, like oil, data is crude, and it's only as good as the refining that we do of it. And what we need are good algorithms to analyze the data. And one of the things that worries me the most as somebody working in artificial intelligence system design is that we don't get enough voice from teachers in the design process for AI. Because actually the way those algorithms are designed to analyze that data is something that we need teachers to help us with, because they must help us get the pedagogy within the design. So 3 useful facts to remember about AI that I hope are comforting and helpful as we move forward. It's smart, but it doesn't understand itself, unlike humans. Data is crude, we need good AI to refine it, and we need teachers to have a voice in that. And AI is here to stay, so we need to get ready to prepare to work with it. So what can we do? We can develop a culture of problem solving and problem specification, a curriculum that focuses on self-efficacy for learners and teachers, so that whatever it is the workplace demands, if you're a self-effective learner, you're going to be able to adapt to it. And we need to get teachers in the conversation, particularly around the ethical implications of AI. Excuse me. So finally, my third part, which I hope is harmony, is a little bit about something practical that we're doing at UCL, because we are working with companies who are developing artificial intelligence technologies, not just companies who develop AI technologies, companies who develop educational technology broadly as well. It's a project that is all about what I call the golden triangle, which is why we have a golden triangle instead of an A in the educate word. It's about bringing together the 3 important communities for getting better educational technology in the hands of learners and teachers, including artificial intelligence technologies. So it's about the people who build the technology, the people who use the technology, and the people who research into the technology and understand how people use technology to learn, and who can help bring the communities together around the centre of evidence. And what we do in this project is that we help EdTech startups to work with their users, teachers, learners, whoever they're designing for, and we help them to understand what evidence is out there that might be useful for them as they design their products or service, and we help them to collect evidence for themselves that will demonstrate if and how their product and service is working, so that they can tell teachers and learners what it is about their product or service that is going to make a difference, and they will have some data and some evidence to support those claims. We're trying to increase the quality of the conversation around whether does it work, which is the question, of course, politicians always ask. You know, tell me if it works and then I'll back it. Okay. Well, we're trying to raise the quality of the conversation around the does it work question. So bringing the three communities together, all of whom have a motivation for being involved, whether it's about communicating my research, improving the design of my product, or finding out how I use technology in my teaching and learning, and how I can have a voice in that design process. That's what it's about. So finally, I'm going to give you some examples of the sort of companies we're working with. So Mathigon, run by somebody called Philip, who was a data scientist for Google and then started up his own business. He felt that he learned research techniques that would help him provide a better product and service. Turing Lab, small company, emanating from Imperial graduates, teaching students how to code. We needed to know we were measuring the right things so we could evaluate how we were evolving as a company along the way. Century Tech, who I've already mentioned, completely new dimension to our work. We helped them see how to bring more pedagogy into their machine learning. And finally, in Spiral, research mentors really helped the company understand and de-risk the evidence-based approach they wanted to adopt. So thank you very much for listening to me. I hope that you found something interesting in the talk. If you want to understand anything more about artificial intelligence and education, this is a freely downloadable book that we wrote year before last, the end of the year before last, Intelligence Unleashed, and that will give you some more information about some of the things that I've been talking about. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. We'll take the questions on both sessions together at the end. So now I'd like to ask Nick Woolley from Northumbria University to talk to us about how they're putting students at the heart of the work they're doing around the broader learning environment.
Afternoon, everybody. It's great to be at Digifest. I'm going to do something a little bit different maybe from the rest of the day's agenda, because I'm not really going to talk about technology. I'm going to talk around it. And that's because my focus today is really going to be putting students at the heart of the learning environment, but not the one you spent a lot of time today getting inspired about and having debates about. I'm going to look beyond TEL. Outside of the classroom, there's an awful lot that goes on in students' lives. They get a lot of support, decisions to stay at university, what course they should study, all sorts of things affect their success. TEL, we've had great activity around. Programs like Changing the Learning Landscape have allowed the sector to understand challenges and opportunities, make some real progress. And it's very right that in the digital and higher education EdTech space, there's a focus on TEL, because that's what students are paying for. It's their education, it's that interaction with their teachers, whether it's higher education or FE. But it's that wider learning environment that I'm interested in. So I'm going to talk a bit about that and what we've been doing at Northumbria University in recent years. And I should say, not everything I'm going to talk about is necessarily the view of my institution. Some of it is personal, and it's informed by having been a librarian for 20 years. And I guess my starting question for everyone to think about is, where does digital fit in the institution? And if you think about technology-enhanced learning, in theory, and certainly in my institution it does, it fits into a pedagogical framework. It could be a program framework, it could be how you fulfill quality standards, and so on. What does that look like for the learning environment outside the classroom? Where does digital fit? So I'm going to tell you what my thoughts are and what my experiences are around that and what we've been doing at Northumbria. And there's a question there, which is, do we know enough about where it should fit in that wider learning environment to inform the design of digital, and actually how we design that learning environment to find a place for digital that's appropriate? I thought I'd drop this in. I don't want to talk about the rights and the wrongs or how we feel about TEF at a personal level, but it exists for many higher education providers. This new excellence framework that assesses teaching rated a whole set of universities and other providers last summer as to being bronze, silver or gold. My university is a good silver, and it's early days, we'll see what happens. But this is part of very deliberate policy and legislative reform to shake up our sector, and certainly in higher education. So it's something we have to understand. And there was a report done by the Higher Education Policy Institute to try and learn lessons from the institutions that were rated gold. So what had they been doing which was different to institutions which hadn't achieved that higher standard? And therefore, in theory, at the time, the ability to charge more money and possibly attract more students. And some of this report mentions digital and ed tech. And it suggests that gold institutions were employing digital technology in innovative ways, and they were thinking more broadly. Now, this is based on the evidence. It's not necessarily what's happening on the ground, but this is a perception. And in the TEF, one of the criteria is learning environment. And that's not just technology-enhanced learning, that's across the piece. So there's a new lens through regulation on digital in the learning environment in institutes of education. So it's worth understanding that. It's also very important to understand students, and everything I do and my colleagues do in the support services at Northumbria University is really around putting the learner at the centre of student experience, understanding them. Every student is an individual. As a group, there are some behaviours which are coming to the fore. This is a cover of a report that Universities UK commissioned last year, which was a big survey of students to understand that as consumers, how are they behaving? How are they feeling about their education? And it's worth having a read if you haven't seen it before. Basically, it found that only half of students saw themselves as customers. But where they did, what they were expecting, and in fact what they all expected, was a very personal, trusted relationship with their university. Not just in terms of what goes on programme, but the whole thing, end to end. And I think for me, professionally, when I started out in libraries, it was at a time when we were seeing students as customers because they were behaving like customers. But I'm just going to say this because I'll refer to customer a few times, and not everyone agrees that students are. What I would say is that students are simultaneously learners, partners, customers, consumers, co-creators. Those aren't exclusive states, and students absolutely do behave like customers. And I can say that from experience, so it's important to at least have that understanding. I've been at Northumbria University for 5 years, and I'd been there for 2 months, and I was asked by a member of our executive in the university, the chief operating officer actually, to come up with a digital strategy for the library, which he felt was very important. So this is from then. If I did it now, I'd use a better colour combination and maybe some different words, so I apologise if it's a bit of a funny mix. But the strategy I came up with, I called Digital First. And it's a bit unusual, it was at the time, because it wasn't just thinking about content and ebooks and getting stuff for students. It was to say digital is first in our thinking. And that might mean that we don't do digital at all to solve a problem we have. So it wasn't going hell-bent for online stuff. And it was to recognise that digital can happen in different spaces. So it's not just online, it is actually also the library as a place. and the librarians that make it happen, our platforms, our technology behind the scenes. And really importantly, this idea, I call it digital literacy. I think these days I probably would think more about digital scholarship as a prevailing theme, that it's this understanding, this expertise at the heart that's really important. And, you know, when I was making this strategy, I was really impressed by a consultant report, I think from the States. Frank Rose and JWT produced this report. I don't know if anyone's seen it. It's from 2013, so it's a bit old now, but it's worth reading. It's called Embracing Analog, and it was basically a good exposition of the trend that as humans, we aren't abandoning the physical world for our smartphones and apps in our phones and becoming wholly virtual because we love physical stuff. We buy vinyl, you know, we drink coffee. And this is important in education and in any digital strategy. So quality is important in digital. And at Northumbria, like many university libraries, we've had the UK government standard for customer service excellence since 2010. And we treat students as customers, absolutely. It's a very rigorous standard. It has 57 elements across 5 main criteria. It does look at things like digital innovation, but it gives us an independent validation and a toolkit. And from that perspective, we start looking for things like moments of truth in a student's experience. So all students still come to the library, and I know that because I can look at the analytics. Most of those students will still be using print books as well as ebooks, and I'll give you some data on that in a minute. But when they get to the library shelf, like many of you will have experienced in your own education, they can have a moment of truth which can be quite negative about the library and then the institution, and then snowball into a whole pile of things. They get to the shelf and the book they want isn't there. And that's very frustrating because it then is a barrier, an obstruction to their learning. Reading is really central to all education. It doesn't matter whether it's on a screen or from print. So our learning around moments of truth in customer journeys, because we think of things like customer service excellence when we do digital, is there's our problem. Rose was talking about what's the problem you're solving, taking that design approach. So how can we use digital when a student gets to a shelf in a physical space and can't find the print book? So we do this. This isn't gee whiz. I'm not expecting people to go, wow, that's amazing. It's really around how we treat students. So this is what we call a plastic ebook. It's a piece of plastic with an NFC tag, a QR code, and the spine label and the cover of the book printed on it. We did this about 2014. It's not meant to look shiny or slick. It's not a robot. But a student can tap their phone on it. So if they've gone to the shelf, they can't find a book, they see this thing, they're in a physical space, but they just go, aha, there's an ebook. They haven't gone online to search for it. They've gone for the print book. And from that, they can get that book directly or save a reference and bookmark the page. Now, this gets used. It doesn't get used very much, maybe once a day. For the people who are interested in about the NFC QR thing and smartphone technology and platforms and stuff, 50-50 split in terms of whether people touch or scan. But every time this happens, it's one less unhappy customer because it's one student who's been able to access the reading so they can do their learning. And that's not about technology, it's about a customer journey. It's about the design. Something else we do is try and have a conversation with students, gather student feedback, keep a dialogue going, because we have to understand them deeply to give them the services they need and the support they need. So we've tried all sorts of things. We have a multi-channel approach. We've made online video feedback. Didn't get used. Best thing we have is this, whiteboards, because it's at the moment of truth. They're in the space, they see the thing, they can write something, and they can write anything they want, and we'll take notice of it, put it back in. What you'll see here is a little thing to think about today. Plug sockets, power. All our technology needs power. Getting power into learning spaces onto the campus is very, very difficult to do well, especially if you let students hack the space. And that's, I could talk about that all day about power, but when I look at how students learn in the library, and I don't even have to go into the library to see it because they have this behavior where they put on Instagram photos of them being in the library. One the other day said, if I don't take a photo of myself in the library, have I been in the library? Is it virtue signaling? I don't know what it is. Is it a call for solidarity from friends? But these are all Instagram library desk selfies by students at Northumbria, and I've got hundreds of these. I collect them because I like doing that kind of thing. But this is information. This is evidence for me, and what it shows me is that all learners at my university generally move between media. They go physical, digital, small screen, big screen, online, offline, pen, keyboard. It's very mixed, it's very blended. And we bear that in mind when we design our learning spaces. We've got about almost 2,500 learning spaces at Northumbria. We've got a very high proportion of fixed IT, almost 50%. But we design spaces without IT because people want spaces without IT, not just to put their own devices, but because they don't want IT necessarily. And we take into account all sorts of things. We take into account pedagogy, the kind of learning activity, the mode in terms of, is it an individual, is it a group? Is it a group working together because they have to, or is it companionship? What's going on there? What are the affinities between these different kinds of activities? What's our professional practice? Are there standards? Here's digital first. Technology is really important, but it fits this bigger system. This is just some of the kind of things we tell students about, and to demonstrate that we understand that they need lots of different things. They need lockers. Some of those lockers have power in, some don't. It's not all just about technology. In terms of reading, it's really interesting. Most of them still aren't hooked on ebooks. Most of them, and the biggest proportion in terms of what they want to do, this is our library survey for the last 3 years, they want both. So libraries have to do both. It's quite hard. And they give us all sorts of reasons, positive and negative. Some students like the tangibility of print. They think note-taking is easier. Some of this does reflect the fact that ebooks are still quite immature technology compared to the print book, and that will change. One thing we do in terms of our service design in the library is to really look at analytics. And this thing is, it's not designed for public view. It's an internal kind of management dashboard. But lots of figures here about what we call our reading list service. So when you're at university, you get directed to reading as well as the reading you find independently. We've got a service with 100,000 references in it. That covers most modules in the university. Doesn't touch the independent reading. And about 58% of that is digital. And the page views to this grows all the time. This is students discovering and accessing their reading. And this is interesting for me when you think about learning analytics, because if we get excited about very rich e-textbooks which can track what students are doing, well, not for most of their reading it can't. So I do worry about things like the observer effect, where by trying to measure something, we change the behavior, and actually, are we going to say, stop reading if we can't count your reading? We just want you to read these texts which have got all these features. Outside the library, one thing we do in our learning environment is we organize around students. So we do a thing called super convergence. And this is a structure chart, which is a funny thing to show at a conference, but it's just to make the point. About 10 years ago, quite a few universities started thinking, well, why don't we put all the student-facing support services, including the library, together? And that can be a line management relationship that coordinates with a focus on the students. We do this. My bit's over here, library, and something called Ask for Help. But we've got student progress, careers and employment, student support and wellbeing, all that student-facing activity in the university in one directorate. What's important is how we then deliver to students. So this is our support model. We've been developing this for probably a decade. It's not a deficit model, it's an opportunities-based model. It's about matching students to the right support when they need it. And this, for me, is a big part of our system in the learning environment outside the classroom where we support students. And in that, there is a place for digital technology. So for us, we have a student portal that delivers a big part of what we call level 0, which is the self-service, the online stuff, students accessing information, advice and guidance themselves before they can then come to level 1. And this is face-to-face. This is a team that are there 24/7, and a student can ask them a query about anything, and they'll resolve about maybe 80% of those queries straight away. And if not, they'll refer, make an appointment to an expert to do the more professional high-level work around visas or finance or literature searching or CVs or whatever it happens to be. And this is really important to keep students on track and help them realise their potential. We've also got a CRM, which is relatively new, and that is a bit of a glue in this system to give everyone that single view of the student. Not all the information, some of it's sensitive, so only certain roles get to see it. But for me, this is a big system I'm in, and we have a student portal, we have a CRM, and we have some, I guess what in technology terms are point solutions, including all the digital library stuff. Some of our big channels into that are physical. So we've spent quite a lot of time in the last couple of years building some new iconic spaces on campus. This is one of them. This is a space we call Student Central at City Campus in the heart of our Newcastle West Campus. And this bit here, which then goes on for 2 more buildings, an 89-metre stretch, is the Student Central bit where students can go and they can access Ask for Help face-to-face, and they'll find one-to-one spaces to access support from any professional advisor and informal open group spaces to do peer-to-peer support, meet employers, have all that activity in one place. That's really, really important for them, really important for them. The rest is all library, including a 9-floor tower that's cut out of the picture. But it's what's inside that counts. Students' perception of VFM is falling, and they don't want big buildings, they want better facilities and support. So if you build something like this, you've got to have something to put in it, and that's our support model, which tells us where digital goes. And in terms of online, this is our portal. It's a bit of our portal. Doesn't look particularly exciting. Yeah, this is the help and support page. What's exciting here is we've been able to use some traditional information and knowledge skills to structure the content with a student-centric view. And this seems such an obvious thing to do in the digital environment, but it doesn't always happen. And if it does happen, it's probably just best efforts of the people trying to work locally somewhere. Money and finance, that's not one team. That's the finance department who will do things like debt recovery. And then it's some colleagues of mine in student and library services who do money advice, welfare stuff. To a student, they don't care, it's different people. So we have to present it to them in one way. So we did a big piece of knowledge management work around a taxonomy. And by doing that, we don't just create a student-centric view to put the learner at the center of this wider environment. What we also do is we create a scaffold where we can start saying, okay, so if a student goes in there to self-serve an article, a knowledge-based article, and get some advice, and it doesn't help them in what they want to do, that taxonomy category routes them to the right team without them having to go through our front line. All sorts of things we can do with this, and that's traditional knowledge management really in the digital context. So I'll finish up with just some questions and some thoughts. And, you know, I think my question when I think about digital is that it's not about technology, it's about people, it's about knowledge, it's about practice, it's about strategy. Where does that go in an organization? Where does it go in an education provider? So I've shown you some of the things we do at Northumbria where it fits. For the TEF and the changing regulatory environment we're in, which we have to take notice of, what would a gold learning environment look like? And actually, what would the learning environment outside the classroom look like in 2023? Some things I'm thinking a lot about at the moment in terms of digital. We know from our student insights that students want a personal experience. They want face-to-face support. Not just academics, but they want face-to-face support outside the classroom. And they want to make a choice about all sorts of things, the resources they use when they do things. And in terms of digital, I think connectivity is so key, the connectivity of the physical and the online. So the learning environment has to connect, it has to augment physical in a smart way. Finally, what we've seen a lot of recently, and Rose mentioned forthcoming, GDPR coming in. Actually, I think the digital understanding, particularly of younger generations, is really going to change. And they maybe aren't going to be so willing to give up their data. And whatever we do in our learning environments, whether it's a physical space and the digital technology in that or what we do online, it's got to be inclusive, it's got to be ethical, and it's got to be trustworthy. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Nick, and thanks to both our speakers for two very thoughtful and thought-provoking presentations that are covering a wide gamut of things, from student as partners, applications learning and teaching, outside the classroom, and I think the happy conclusion that we need both digital and people, which is reassuring, I think. Can I also ask Paul McKean, our head of FE and Skills, to join us on the stage, just to make sure we have an FE perspective reflected. And I'm going to hit you with a question as soon as you sit down, Paul, or perhaps even slightly before you sit down. And just to invite you really to reflect on what you've heard from the perspective of FE and Skills.
Thank you to both speakers. I think it's been a great presentation from both of you, and it's been kind of challenging for me to think about how FE is impacted. And I have to say, Nick, straight away, your plastic e-books is a great way of sort of augmenting that physical and online presence. And I think Shakira spoke this morning about the importance of community of learning and the importance of not losing that face-to-face connection and just the whole community of being there for FE learners. They're quite often returners, people have caring responsibility, people who have difficulty connecting with the outside world. I was a return to FE myself, so I'm very aware of that. And I think just coming back to the kind of problem-solution situation, we as JISC have actually procured on behalf of the FE sector an awful lot of e-books for GCSE English and Maths, which is a major problem to the FE sector. There's an awful lot of learners who come back into the FE space without level C in GCSE English or Maths. So we've procured access to these e-books, but actually we recognise that not every student who's actually on a course is taking up the value of them GCSE books, mainly because they probably go to a library expecting the book to be there, but there isn't a physical book being there. So actually the solution you've just provided, I think, is a way forward for that. Coming back to the AI position, I'm very aware, actually, my old college involved now, they've got a chatbot. They're working with IBM Watson, Bolton College. So they're doing that around sort of learner support, enabling the learner to run a query about the kind of the timetable that they're doing, their exams and so on. And we're also aware from work that the behavioural unit have done, just sending a text message to a learner before an exam is increasing retention and success. So we know that even the tiniest kind of intervention can make a massive difference. So I think both presentations were great, and they absolutely have impact in FE.
Great, thanks. I would now, Jack, have we got any questions on the hashtag? Okay, have you got a mic? Oh, one's coming.
So yeah, it's a question from Nick C on Twitter, who's asked, how good is AI at dealing with creating new knowledge with our students, as opposed to revealing knowledge as a fixed artifact to be passed on?
Good question. I like it. I don't know where you are, but good question. Creating knowledge. You see, that's where AI does have its problems. So AI is good at storing lots of information, finding nuggets of information, looking at different pieces of evidence and seeing what weight they have. So the ingredients of creating knowledge are there, but it needs the human to do the real knowledge creation process. So, I mean, basically, the AI that's commonly used at the moment is machine learning, that's had the biggest impact. And it's basically pattern matching. I mean, whether it's about saying, is the face I'm looking at here the same as the one in the passport? Or is this, how do I match this query to this huge amount of stuff I've got? Or it's all about patterns, really, in data. So I would not say that AI creates knowledge in the way I'm interpreting that question to mean. And creativity is one, of course, of the great human intellectual qualities. Now, there are some systems, AI systems, that make some good stabs at creativity in the arts, in music. But in terms of creating knowledge, not yet.
Thanks. Did we have any questions in the room? Would anyone like to put their hand up and then wait for the people with the paddle and the mic to come to you? Yes, there's a question here. Thanks.
I'd just like to know your thoughts on how AI could be used to help combat plagiarism and ghostwriting. I haven't heard much said about that today, but it's something that, you know, is a massive problem for us, and we need to tackle it to preserve the integrity of the qualifications that our students are getting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that whole issue is really important. And part of it is to do with the way that we assess students. And what we can do with AI is really fine-grained analysis. So you get that continuous formative assessment that takes data about mouse movements as well as more larger grain size data about answers to questions, whereby, you know, it's pretty difficult to pretend to be somebody else. You know, you are your kind of stack of information. And actually, as I said in the talk, you know, we can look at more than subject knowledge. We can look at lots of characteristics, and we can also help to support mental well-being, which is obviously extremely important, and the whole piece around anxiety. And so that we can actually tackle plagiarism, but not by using AI, I don't think, to spot plagiarism. It's about creating systems whereby plagiarism isn't possible. And also, in my kind of vision of where AI could take us, it would be very much a place where a learner is in charge of their data. They decide what it is they want to show an employer, what it is they want to show a university, where they believe their strengths are. You can't plagiarize that kind of thing, because it's about your understanding of your own self. And so it's the way that we can use AI to make us smarter and more aware of our own skills and abilities is where I think we can tackle that most effectively. It is a really important question, though.
Did you want to comment on that from a library and learning services perspective?
Yeah, I mean, and everything Rosa said is, you know, spot on. I think there's another dimension, which is, you know, when you ask the question, why do students plagiarize? What's the motivation? And actually, it isn't any one thing. So definitely students are being very deliberate in the tactics they use, in terms of, you know, what lectures they go to, what pieces of work they're going to do, in a way that I can't comprehend from, you know, the degrees I did. I was unorganized, I didn't know what was going on, but I didn't need to be. So they're very tactical. But actually what we also see, I think there's two things which have been important in terms of academic integrity and plagiarism, which is the transition to higher education. And I think it's, I think even in the 80s, academic colleagues were noting that their perception of skills and knowledge, the level was changing when students were coming in. What that means for me is that universities have to work harder, support services have to work harder to help students make the transition. So there's an interim thing we've got to help them do early on. And a lot of universities are actually doing this. Some of that's around skills, some of it's around expectations, some of it's more cultural. And it might also be earlier interventions where there's a personal circumstance which might mean that people feel more under pressure, so they will have less integrity, and it's not a deliberate thing. But I think we also see some big generational change in terms of how people work with media, and I think it's probably a well-known phenomenon that certainly the younger generations, and that's probably millennials, and the generations coming after, work with information in a very different way. So sampling and reusing in a way that was never possible for, dare I say, some of us in this room. So their relationship with knowledge is different, and they don't actually understand necessarily that they are committing plagiarism. So it becomes harder a concept to communicate to them. So I think there's probably all sorts of things we can do, but I think helping them make the transition and helping them take a positive approach where they understand the value of thinking differently and working differently. And maybe taking some pressure off them, you know, where you get the perverse behaviour resulting.
Thanks very much. Do we have any further questions? We do a big hand wave because I'm trying to scan the whole room. I just wanted, in that case, to as I said in my intro, sort of bring you back to that question that Shakira raised this morning of, is all of this supporting those hardest to reach students, or the students from non-traditional backgrounds, the adult returners, the students for whom further and higher education may be more of a leap, and who may be coming in without some of the skills to navigate the digital environment and the education environment generally. So I'd just like to get a quick perspective from each of you on that. Okay.
I think it's a difficult question to give one answer to, because it's almost case by case about individual students. What we know is as participation's gone up and access has improved, and there are still barriers which we know about, the diversity of the student body has really grown massively. So you've got to treat them as individuals, and it's sometimes very difficult to predict what an intervention or a kind of support or a piece of program design, what effect it's going to have. So we've heard already ebooks to promote access to resources for learning might not be accessible because actually there's a digital divide. Not everyone has got good Wi-Fi at home, not everyone can afford it. Not everyone has a home where they can focus without distraction. Can they travel into the library? Is the library open? These very physiological things become very, very important. So I think universities have to focus on being safe and supported environments, being inclusive environments, and being able to treat students as individuals, which is incredibly difficult with the pressures we face, where essentially we often have to do more and better for less. I'm not going to say at this point that learning analytics is a magic bullet, but I think joining up views of the student is important. We've done some work in Northumbria around change of circumstance. When a student feels they want to withdraw, when they want to change course, when they want time off, and being able to reach out to them early on in that process to make sure they make the right decision for them, which could be, leaving the university. We're not using a heavily automated analytical approach. We're just trying to join up staff views of those students, get people working together more closely. So I think there's a lot more we can do if we work as single, entities in our organisations, have that focus on students. But I think it's almost, I wouldn't say it's a wicked problem, but it is very complicated.
Thanks. Rose?
It's something I worry about a lot. I mean, I was a school refuser at 14. I didn't go to university until I was 32. Without the further education sector, I would be nowhere. I got day release from a job to go to an FE college. So I understand a little bit of not being that traditional person who kind of achieves well and gets on a straight and narrow road straight away. And I'm actually very worried about it because I think when I look at what's possible with artificial intelligence, my optimistic side, which usually takes over, sees the huge possibilities it brings for us to provide fantastic resources for people all over the world